Sylvester Stallone. Secret mission in Ukraine? What if I told you that Sylvester Stallone, the legend behind Rocky and Rambo, has been spotted in Ukraine on a mission so dangerous that it could change everything we know about him? I know it sounds crazy, but the clues are real. The footage is real. The whispers from insiders? Terrifying. Some say he's filming a secret war movie, but others believe something much bigger is happening. A shadowy operation, classified meetings, and a past connection he never wanted to reveal. The truth? It's more shocking than Hollywood could ever script. This is part one of a mind-blowing series that will reveal what brought Stallone to Ukraine and why he tried to keep it hidden. A shocking link between his family history and a forgotten military project. The leaked security footage that confirms everything. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button on Mazer Bro so you don't miss the next part, because trust me, it only gets crazier from here. It all started with a video. At first, no one believed it. Some said it was AI generated. Others called it a hoax, a deep fake, a cheap PR stunt for some upcoming action flick. But the footage was real. A grainy, shaky recording leaked from an anonymous source. A dark alleyway in Kyiv, Ukraine. A man, bundled in a heavy coat, is stepping out of a black SUV. At first glance, just another foreigner in a war-torn country. But then the camera zoomed in. It was him, Slystallone. Not a lookalike, not an actor playing a role. The real Sylvester Stallone. The internet exploded. WTF is Stallone doing in Ukraine? New Rambo movie? CIA mission? Is he fighting? Bro, this is insane. No way this is real. Yet there he was, in the heart of a conflict zone, walking into an abandoned building with two heavily armed men. The clip lasted only 42 seconds, but it was enough to set the world on fire. And then the leaker vanished. The original post on Telegram? Deleted. The Twitter account that spread it? Suspended. The user who uploaded it? Gone. Somebody didn't want this getting out. The clue everyone missed. While the internet argued whether it was a deep fake, a few sharp-eyed fans noticed something chilling. In the video, Stallone wasn't alone. Standing beside him, a man wearing a jacket with a strange emblem. Not military, not police. Something different. A crest no one recognized. Until a retired intelligence analyst weighed in. I haven't seen that symbol in years, he wrote in a cryptic Reddit post. And if I'm right, Stallone is in serious danger. Within minutes, his account was banned. But someone screenshotted his comment before it disappeared. It mentioned something called Project Talon. That's when things got really weird. What the CIA won't talk about. A journalist from London, who had spent years covering black ops, went down the rabbit hole. What he found was buried deep, hidden in old declassified documents from the Cold War. Project Talon was never supposed to exist. Officially, the US denied it ever happened. But whispers in the intelligence community spoke of an off-the-books operation involving high-profile Hollywood figures. The documents were vague. No direct mentions of Stallone. But one name kept appearing. An old Soviet informant with ties to both Ukraine and Hollywood. Viktor Petrenko. And here's the kicker. Petrenko vanished in 1985, the same year Rambo, First Blood Part 2, was released. Coincidence? Maybe. But what if it wasn't? The missing pages. A researcher at the National Archives tried to pull more records on Project Talon. But when she did, she got a response she never expected. Files restricted. Classified clearance required. She had seen this before. It meant one thing. Somebody didn't want people looking into this. That's when an anonymous whistleblower reached out to a small independent news site. He sent them redacted documents. Pages covered in black ink, but with just enough information visible to drop a bombshell. A single, unedited line stood out. Primary subject, Stallone. That's when the theory exploded. The million-dollar question. If Stallone's name was linked to an old Black Ops program, what the hell was he doing in Ukraine now? Some thought he was working on a movie about the war. But why the secrecy? Why the deleted posts, the banned accounts, the missing files? And most importantly, why did Stallone himself refuse to comment? He had been silent. No press statements. No interviews. No denials. Like he was waiting. For what? That's what we're about to uncover. The silence was deafening. No response from Stallone. No official statements. No denials. Nothing. Just a complete media blackout. Journalists tried reaching out to his team, his PR agents, his manager, and even old Hollywood friends. Everyone either ignored requests or gave the same vague answer. We don't know what you're talking about. But someone did. An independent investigator, a former military intelligence officer turned journalist, decided to dig deeper. He wasn't buying the official silence. He traced the origins of a leaked video. It wasn't as anonymous as people thought. It had first surfaced on a private military forum, a restricted access board where mercenaries, ex-soldiers, and intelligence operatives shared classified information. One of the users had uploaded the footage under the title Ghost Operation, Hollywood Asset in Active Zone. 2 hours later, the post was deleted. The user was banned, but not before someone saved it. The investigator got in contact with an anonymous source, someone claiming to have access to military intelligence reports from Ukraine. The source provided something even more disturbing than the video itself. A flight log. It showed that a private jet had landed in Poland a week before the video was leaked. Registered under a shell corporation. But what is the name attached to the booking? Sylvester Stallone. No one in Hollywood books private jets under their real names. They use aliases, production companies, anything but their own. So why did this one slip through? Unless it wasn't meant to be found. The investigator dug further. Another record, this time from the Ukrainian Border Authority. Same date, same name. Stallone had entered the country under a special clearance status. Not as a filmmaker, not as a tourist, as a foreign consultant. Consultant for what? That's when things took a turn. He contacted an old friend in European intelligence, someone who owed him a favor. The friend ran the name through a confidential database and found a restricted file. He couldn't open it, but the file's metadata was enough to raise alarms. It had been updated 3 days before the video leaked. Why was a classified intelligence file about Stallone being modified just as the world started asking questions? That's when another source, a former CIA contractor, reached out with something even more explosive. He claimed to have worked on a disinformation operation back in the 90s, aimed at controlling Hollywood narratives about certain military operations. The goal was simple: use entertainment to distract from real classified missions. Stallone's name came up multiple times, and not just because of Rambo. There were rumors that he had been approached by government operatives, not for movie roles, but for something else. A special advisory role in psychological operations. At the time, it sounded absurd. A Hollywood action star working with intelligence agencies? Laughable. Until now. The former contractor sent a cryptic message before going silent. If he's in Ukraine, it's not for a movie. And if he's being protected, there's a reason. Protected by whom? Another breakthrough came from a completely unexpected source. An old newspaper clipping from the 1980s. A forgotten interview with a Soviet defector who had once worked in counterintelligence. The man had made a bizarre claim at the time, something that no one took seriously. That the Kremlin had once monitored Hollywood actors for potential intelligence recruitment. That certain American stars had ties to figures in the underground arms trade. And one of the names he mentioned? Stallone. The article was dismissed as Cold War paranoia. But now, decades later, with the leaked video, the missing files, and the intelligence records showing his movements, it all started to make sense. Stallone had never been just an actor. And if he was in Ukraine now, walking into an abandoned building with men carrying military-grade weapons, then someone in power knew exactly why he was there. The real question was, why was everyone else being kept in the dark? The deeper the investigator dug, the more unsettling the story became. The pieces weren't just random fragments of conspiracy theories. They were forming a clear pattern. Someone, somewhere, had gone to great lengths to erase any official trace of Stallone's presence in Ukraine. But why? A break came when a former Ukrainian intelligence officer, now living in exile, provided an unexpected lead. He confirmed that, in the days leading up to the leaked video, a restricted air corridor had been authorized for an unregistered aircraft. It had entered Ukrainian airspace without a public flight plan, landed at a remote military base, and within an hour was gone again. The aircraft was not logged in any official civilian records, but military radar had picked it up. There were only 4 passengers on board. One of them was a man in his late 70s, American, and high profile. The description fit. The investigator pressed his source for more details, but the man was hesitant. "I can't say more," he wrote. "Not safe." And then he disappeared. The investigator tried reaching him again. Emails bounced. His phone number was suddenly out of service. No trace of him anywhere. Another dead end. Except it wasn't, because at the same time, another journalist, working on an unrelated story, stumbled onto something even more bizarre. A classified military intelligence bulletin from Kyiv had been leaked. The bulletin contained encrypted references to foreign assets operating within Ukrainian borders. Most of the document was unreadable without a cipher key, but a few lines stood out. One referenced a Western VIP requiring immediate extraction. Another mentioned a security breach at an undisclosed facility. And one word, circled in red, stood out more than anything else. Talon, the same word that had appeared in old, redacted Cold War files. The same word the intelligence analyst had referenced before his account was banned. The same word kept resurfacing whenever Stallone's name came up in places it shouldn't have. Someone, somewhere, was pulling strings behind the scenes. The investigator tried pushing deeper, contacting his sources in the U.S. intelligence community. No one wanted to talk. But then, one person did. A retired operative, someone who had once worked in psychological warfare, reached out under a pseudonym. He had one message. "If you think Stallone is just an actor, you're not asking the right questions." The investigator pressed him for details. Who was protecting Stallone? Why was his presence in Ukraine being erased? What was Project Talon? The operative wouldn't say much, but he did give one chilling hint. Talon was never about the Cold War. That IT was about something much older. And it's still active. Still active. Meaning whatever had started decades ago wasn't over. Meaning Stallone's presence in Ukraine wasn't just about old secrets. It was about something happening right now. The investigator couldn't shake the feeling that he was onto something much bigger than just Stallone's secret trip to Ukraine. Every time he got close to a real answer, someone disappeared. Every time a new clue surfaced, it was buried just as quickly. But there was one thing he knew for certain. Project Talon wasn't just some forgotten Cold War operation. It was still active, and Stallone was caught in the middle of it. A breakthrough came unexpectedly through an old military contact who had spent years stationed in Eastern Europe. He wasn't directly connected to intelligence work, but he knew people who were. One name came up repeatedly in their conversations. Not a politician, not a general, not even a spy, a scientist. More specifically, a bioweapons expert who had disappeared from public records nearly 40 years ago. A man named Dr. Mikhail Rudenko. The investigator started digging. There was almost nothing on Rudenko. His last known appearance was in a Soviet research facility in the early 1980s. After that, nothing. No death certificate. No defection records. No classified files. It was as if he had been erased. But there was one clue. A declassified CIA briefing from 1985 mentioned a high-value asset extraction attempt in Soviet-occupied Afghanistan. The mission had failed. The asset was never recovered. The asset's name was blacked out in the report. But the timing matched exactly with Rudenko's disappearance. And here's where things got even more disturbing. The same briefing referenced an unidentified American who had been present during the attempted extraction. A civilian. Someone the CIA claimed had no official connection to the operation. The investigator didn't have proof, but he had a strong suspicion. That American? It was Stallone. If he had been involved in a failed Cold War extraction mission, it would explain everything. Why his name kept surfacing in classified documents, why his presence in Ukraine was being covered up, and why an old scientist's name was suddenly relevant again. But the real question was why now? What was in Ukraine that required Stallone's direct involvement? The investigator kept searching, and then he found something that made his blood run cold. A private security contract was signed just 3 weeks before Stallone was spotted in Kyiv. It was vague, filled with legal jargon, but one phrase stood out: high-risk recovery of priority subject. The contract had been issued by a European defense contractor with known ties to covert military operations. And the location of the operation? Eastern Ukraine, not far from an abandoned Soviet research facility. The same facility where, according to old records, Dr. Mikhail Rudenko had once worked. The pieces were finally falling into place. Stallone wasn't just in Ukraine for some classified diplomatic meeting or an underground film project. He was there for a recovery mission. But who, or what, was he trying to recover? The investigator knew he was running out of time. Too many sources had already gone silent. Too many leads had disappeared just as quickly as they surfaced. But now he had something real. A contract for a high-risk recovery mission tied to an abandoned Soviet research facility in eastern Ukraine. And Stallone was at the center of it. The facility in question had been shut down in the late 1980s. Officially, it was a biological research lab working on vaccines. Unofficially, there were rumors that it had been part of a secret Soviet weapons program, one focused not on missiles or tanks, but on human enhancement. The investigator dug up what little he could. Buried in old intelligence reports were fragmented references to human trials conducted under extreme secrecy. One memo, dated 1983, described the research as highly unstable and ethically indefensible. Another, from 1986, warned of severe psychological side effects in test subjects. And then, in 1987, the lab was abruptly shut down. All records destroyed. All personnel reassigned. Except for one man, Dr. Mikhail Rudenko, the scientist who had vanished in the 1980s. The same man whose name had surfaced in connection with Stallone's covert activities. If the contract was real, if Stallone was really in Ukraine to recover something from that facility, then there were only two possibilities. Either Rudenko was still alive, or something he created was. The investigator needed more proof. He reached out to an old contact, someone who had worked in military intelligence and still had access to restricted satellite images. The images showed something strange. Despite being officially abandoned for over 30 years, the facility wasn't as empty as it should have been. There were signs of recent activity, vehicles coming and going, power lines that were still active, and most disturbing of all, heat signatures inside the building. Someone was there, and they weren't just passing through. The investigator sent the images to a former special operations soldier, someone who had seen plenty of classified missions firsthand. His response was immediate. "You're looking at a secured site. That's not a ruin. Someone's keeping it operational." The investigator pressed him. What kind of operation? Could be anything. Bioresearch, black site prison, weapons storage. But if Stallone is involved, and if this ties back to Project Talon, then my guess? A pause. They're pulling something out of there. And whatever it is, it's not supposed to see daylight. The investigator felt a sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't just about a forgotten Soviet experiment. This wasn't just about Stallone's past ties to intelligence. This was about something that had been hidden for decades and was now being recovered. But why? And who wanted it back? The investigator was close. Too close. A final clue arrived in the form of a scrambled voicemail. No number. No caller ID. Just a distorted voice warning him to stop. "You don't understand what you're looking at," the message said. Some things were buried for a reason. And then, as if to make sure he got the message, his email account was locked. His phone started glitching. Someone was watching. But it was too late to back out now. He had the satellite images. He had the contract. He had the history of the facility, the ties to Stallone, and the whispers of Project Talon. Now, he needed to know what was inside that abandoned lab. An unexpected breakthrough came from an unlikely source, an old Ukrainian soldier who had served as security near the site in the 1990s. Back then, he said, the lab was not abandoned. There were still people inside. Scientists, foreigners, men in military uniforms with no insignia. They weren't just guarding the place. They were keeping something inside. What? The investigator asked. The old soldier hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "People." The investigator felt his skin go cold. According to the soldier, experiments had continued long after the fall of the Soviet Union. At first, it was mental conditioning, extreme psychological tests designed to create soldiers with inhuman endurance, no fear and no hesitation. But later, it turned into something else, something unnatural. They changed, the soldier said. Some of them didn't survive. The ones who did, they weren't human anymore. The investigator demanded proof. I don't have proof, the soldier said, but I have something else. He sent over an old, grainy photo. It showed a man in a lab coat standing next to two soldiers. The scientist was Dr. Mikhail Rudenko. The soldiers had no visible ranks, but their faces, their eyes were black. Their skin looked too smooth, too stretched, and their veins were dark, almost as if the blood inside wasn't normal. The investigator was no longer sure if he wanted answers. But then came the final piece of evidence. A military after-action report from 2 weeks ago. Classified, stamped, but not fully redacted. It described an unauthorized breach at an abandoned Soviet facility in eastern Ukraine. The infiltrators were described as Western operatives working under black contract authority. There were no survivors. The report said nothing about who the operatives were, nothing about what they were after. But there was a single line at the bottom of the page, left and censored. Primary objective secured. Transported to U.S. custody. High-risk asset. Status unknown. The investigator knew what it meant. They had recovered something. Or someone. And Stallone? No one had seen him since.